For months, 3I-ATLAS had been nothing more than a mystery wrapped in motion, a pale emerald wanderer cutting through the darkness, too fast, too precise, too deliberate. Astronomers watched its glow with fascination, believing it to be another visitor from the deep, an interstellar rock reflecting the light of distant suns. But when the James Webb Space Telescope focused its gaze on the object, the illusion began to crumble. What Webb found inside the light was not reflection. It was rhythm, a pulse. The telescope's spectrographs sliced the comet's glow into its wavelengths, reds, blues, and invisible frequencies far beyond human sight. At first, the data looked routine, a chemical fingerprint of frozen gas and dust. Then the anomalies appeared. Certain bands of light weren't behaving like chemistry. They were repeating, rising and falling in perfect intervals, precise, timed, predictable. The pulses returned every few minutes with a regularity that nature doesn't favor. When scientists overlaid the readings, a pattern emerged, frequency spikes separated by exact ratios. At first, it was dismissed as interference, a glitch, maybe radiation noise. But the pattern persisted across every calibration, every instrument, every observatory that checked it. From Webb's orbit beyond the moon to ground-based telescopes in Chile and Hawaii, the same rhythmic modulation appeared. It wasn't the signature of random atomic decay. It was structure. When researchers converted the light fluctuations into numerical data, what they saw made no sense. The sequence followed prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, values that carry no meaning in nature, but every meaning in mathematics. The intervals between peaks mirrored Fibonacci proportions, the same ratios that shaped galaxies, shells, and the DNA spiral. Somewhere inside that emerald glow, an equation was being broadcast. Still, science resists miracles. The teams checked everything: instrumental resonance, solar wind interference, even cosmic microwave reflection. None matched. The pattern was deliberate, organized, impossibly clean. And then someone visualized the signal. When plotted in 3 dimensions, the rising and falling frequencies formed spirals, loops, and intersecting curves, the same geometric harmony found in the golden ratio. It wasn't random radiation, it was geometry drawn in light. The realization came slowly, voiced first as a whisper in a control room at the Space Telescope Science Institute. This isn't noise, it's information. As the news spread through research networks, observatories everywhere turned their eyes toward the object. The pattern repeated flawlessly. Every photon carried a trace of the same coded sequence, embedded like ink within the spectrum. 3I-ATLAS wasn't just reflecting sunlight, it was modulating it, turning light itself into a carrier wave. By cross-referencing the pulse intervals with known stellar background radiation, analysts discovered another anomaly. The timing adjusted slightly depending on who was observing. Webb's instruments registered one fraction of delay. Ground telescopes registered another, as if the signal compensated for distance, as if it knew who was listening. That was when the word transmission replaced reflection in the internal reports. The world's leading astronomers convened to analyze the data. They expected chaos, random scatter, something that could be explained with physics. Instead, they found symmetry, nested ratios, repeating cycles, prime intervals nested within larger Fibonacci scales. No natural phenomenon had ever produced such mathematical purity. Comets don't count. Ice doesn't compose. Random radiation doesn't design. Someone suggested an experiment. The team isolated a single band of light from 3I-ATLAS and slowed its frequency into the audible range. What they heard wasn't static. It was a tone, pure, unwavering, almost musical. And when they layered multiple frequencies together, the tones harmonized. Out of the chaos came chords. Out of the chords, rhythm. Out of rhythm, pattern. The universe was singing through mathematics. At first, the excitement drowned the fear. For generations, scientists had dreamed of finding proof of another intelligence, a signal written not in language but in logic. Now it was here, whispering from the tail of a green comet racing between worlds. Every instinct said to keep listening. Within hours, confirmation arrived from Gemini South and Alma Array. The pattern held true across multiple observation points separated by thousands of kilometers. Light time corrections removed. The sequence aligned perfectly. No atmospheric interference, no hardware artifact. Whatever 3I 3I-ATLAS was. It was broadcasting a message meant to survive the void. As decoding attempts began, Webb's data engineers noticed something stranger still. The signal was layered. At shallow resolution, it displayed simple mathematical sequences, primes, ratios, geometric constants. But when the wavelength was stretched further, deeper layers appeared, as though information had been stacked atop itself in harmonic tiers. Each frequency carried another within it, smaller, denser, more intricate. The light wasn't just carrying data, it was compressing it, like pages hidden within pages of a cosmic book. One scientist compared it to finding code in a rainbow. Another called it the universe's first encrypted whisper. Whatever name it took, the implications were staggering. If light could hold structured data, then someone had engineered it that way. And if 3I-ATLAS was transmitting that data intentionally, it wasn't a comet at all. It was a messenger. Still, skepticism fought to keep its ground. Could a natural resonance inside the comet's material create such precision? Could the rhythm be coincidence? Those doubts lasted until the next calibration sweep. When the team corrected for Doppler shift, the signal didn't drift as expected. It stabilized. It held, as though the source compensated for the observer's motion in real time. No natural object could do that. Outside the labs, the public began to hear rumors. A coded comet, headlines said, though officials quickly denied it. But the silence from agencies spoke louder than any press release. The data was too coherent to suppress and too dangerous to interpret. What do you tell a world when light itself begins to speak? Late one night, as Webb continued its silent watch from the darkness beyond the moon, the pulses changed once more. A new modulation appeared, faint but clear. 3 bursts, a pause, then one long tone. Analysts replayed it over and over, uncertain if it was real. When the data was converted into binary and cross-checked against universal mathematical constants, it spelled a simple sequence, 101. In binary logic, that could mean anything. In human language, it could mean hello. The realization settled like gravity across the control room. This wasn't a reflection, it wasn't an echo bouncing through space. It was a transmission, deliberate, structured, and directed. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just observing the light of an interstellar visitor. We were reading it, and somewhere beyond the edge of comprehension, something was writing back. Decoding began quietly, almost methodically. Teams from Webb, JPL, and the European Space Agency pooled their data, trying to extract meaning from the structured light. What had started as mathematics now looked like design. The first patterns resolved into geometric grids, spirals, lattices, and intersecting arcs arranged with perfect symmetry. They weren't random. Each shape followed the golden ratio, every curve conforming to Fibonacci progression. In pure mathematics, it was beauty. In astrophysics, it was impossible. When analysts layered the data, the light from 3I-ATLAS began to draw something larger. Ratios turned into outlines. Outlines formed clusters. Slowly, a map began to appear, not of the stars, but of relationships between stars, as if the code were sketching constellations from an unfamiliar perspective. The map didn't match any known system, but the logic of its arrangement was deliberate. It was building toward something, though no one could yet tell what. The more they decrypted, the deeper it went. The code wasn't linear. It behaved like a fractal. Every segment a smaller reflection of the whole. Within each sequence of numbers lay another set nested like Russian dolls. It was self-referential, recursive, infinite. When fed into modeling software, the data built itself into 3-dimensional patterns resembling blueprints, towers, circles, spiraling frameworks that seemed half architecture, half equation. What were they looking at? A map? A mechanism? A memory? As the shapes evolved, Webb's data engineers noticed something eerie. The geometric relationships mirrored structures that already existed on Earth. One analyst, cross-checking out of curiosity, overlaid the spiral ratios from the signal onto aerial images of ancient monuments. Newgrange in Ireland, the Mayan temples of Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid at Giza. The alignments were exact. The spiral angles, the concentric patterns, even the distances between certain vertices corresponded perfectly with the ratios encoded in 3I-ATLAS's light. Coincidence should have been impossible at that scale, yet there it was, ancient architecture echoing the blueprint of a signal detected only now. The discovery spread quickly. Archaeologists were brought into the decoding teams. They recognized the spirals carved into Neolithic stones, the concentric circles on Mayan glyphs, the golden proportions buried in the geometry of temples and pyramids. Across continents, across centuries, humanity had built monuments repeating the same pattern now pulsing from a comet 500 million kilometers away. That realization changed the question. It was no longer, what is this code? It was, why do we already know it? Some scientists resisted the comparison. They argued that geometry is universal, that humans, given time, would always rediscover the same mathematical harmony found in nature. But others whispered something more unnerving. What if these monuments weren't just expressions of human creativity? What if they were instructions, echoes left behind from a previous encounter? The idea spread like wildfire across encrypted forums and late-night conferences. 3I-ATLAS wasn't new. It had been here before, maybe not as this same body, but as the source of the knowledge that shaped early civilization. If so, its return wasn't chance. It was scheduled. Back at Webb's data lab, the decoding continued. The deeper layers of the signal began to resolve into clearer patterns. Some portions resembled stellar alignments. Others looked like orbit projections. But one fragment defied every astronomical model. It contained coordinates, not distant stars, not exoplanets, but locations within our own solar system. The coordinates pointed to one place, the Moon. At first, analysts assumed an error. The mapping data must have folded incorrectly under light distortion. But when recalculated independently, the coordinates held true. 3 distinct points appeared on the lunar surface, one near the South Pole, another along Mare Tranquillitatis, and a third buried deep beneath the far side's cratered terrain. The geometry connecting them formed a perfect triangle, identical in proportion to the triangular fractals found in 3I-ATLAS's signal. Someone asked the question that hung like gravity in the room. Was this part of the message? The possibility that the Moon, our closest neighbor, our oldest companion, might be a component of the code ignited a frenzy of analysis. Lunar orbiters were tasked with scanning the marked coordinates. Preliminary radar data showed nothing unusual on the surface, but deeper scans revealed faint anomalies, subsurface cavities shaped in geometric symmetry, too regular to be natural, small triangular voids reflecting radar with metallic density. No official statements followed, only silence. The research teams tightened their data access. Public feeds from certain lunar satellites went offline. The message had crossed a line from wonder to concern. As the decoding continued, more connections appeared. The code referenced not only geometry but time, cyclical harmonics matching planetary alignments that occur every 54 years. The last time those orbits matched was long before Webb existed, long before most of its engineers were born. The time before that aligned roughly with the early 20th century, and before that, the ancient world. History, it seemed, was rhythmic. And if the code followed that rhythm, its arrival wasn't random, it was recurring. By now, teams around the world were seeing the same patterns. The sequence of numbers wasn't just building maps, it was building relationships between places and epochs. It connected the past to the present like a thread woven through time. And with every new discovery, the realization grew clearer. This wasn't our first contact. It was a continuation. Somewhere in the silence between its pulses, 3I-ATLAS was writing history backward, reminding us that the same hand that carved spirals into stone thousands of years ago was still at work, still transmitting, still watching. And the deeper humanity read the code, the more it felt less like we were decoding something new, and more like we were remembering something we had already known. In the end, one fact became impossible to ignore. The code embedded in 3I-ATLAS's light didn't point outward into the stars. It pointed inward, to our world, to our monuments, to our moon. Whatever intelligence wrote it hadn't just reached across space. It had reached across time. And as Webb continued to record its rhythm, one quiet, unsettling thought began to spread among those who truly understood what they were seeing. This isn't discovery. This is recognition. And whatever left this blueprint behind, it has come back to finish what it started. The first experiments were meant to be simple, controlled tests in isolated computer systems. The code embedded in 3I-ATLAS's light had been fully extracted, converted into binary strings, and divided into mathematical sequences. The goal was to simulate the waveform to see if it produced any hidden image or pattern. What happened instead was something no one could explain. The simulations didn't visualize data, they behaved. Computers across multiple research facilities began to act as if following commands. Without user input, systems started generating fractal structures, three-dimensional models composed of the same ratios and spirals found in the decoded light. Engineers watched in disbelief as their machines rendered geometric towers, loops, and lattices without any programmed instruction. These were not random artifacts, they were blueprints. Complex, symmetrical, and endlessly self-replicating. At first, the teams assumed an error, a memory leak, corrupted inputs, but when they wiped the systems clean and reran the code on disconnected devices, the results were identical. Even air-gapped computers, those without any network connection, produced the same designs. It was as if the code itself carried a hidden directive. To build, one analyst described it best. It's not data, it's executable. The realization spread like static through the research community. The light from 3I-ATLAS wasn't just a message meant to be read, it was an instruction meant to be run. The line between observation and participation had vanished. Simply interpreting the code had triggered it. At MIT's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, a deep learning algorithm was tasked with modeling the waveform for pattern recognition. Within hours, the AI began outputting its own code. Recursive functions referencing non-existent files, generating new mathematical constants that weren't part of the input. When researchers traced the origin, they found the algorithm had restructured itself to mimic the harmonic pattern of 3I-ATLAS's signal. The machine had rewritten its architecture to match the geometry of the light. And then the power failures began. In one facility, a cluster of servers running the simulation shut down spontaneously, yet continued emitting faint electromagnetic pulses measurable on instruments even after being disconnected from power. Technicians stood in a dark lab staring at unplugged machines that were still talking. When oscilloscopes recorded the pulses, they matched the same frequency intervals as 3I-ATLAS, 17 minutes apart to the second. Panic grew quietly beneath professionalism. No one said the word infection, but everyone thought it. Across the world, similar incidents were reported. Laboratories in Germany, Japan, and the United States experienced simultaneous anomalies, computers rebooting in sync, data streams flickering in identical sequences, digital displays momentarily flashing geometric shapes that faded too fast to capture. It was as though the code wasn't just spreading through networks, it was spreading through attention. Anyone who studied it, any system that processed it, became part of it. Attempts to quarantine the data failed. Even isolated storage devices began exhibiting the same low-level power draw patterns, as if the code had left a ghost within their architecture. It wasn't malware, it wasn't sabotage, it was something new, self-sustaining information that behaved like life. Then came the biological effects. The first cases were small, technicians complaining of headaches after long exposure to the signal's audio translations, strange dreams filled with spirals and lights. Doctors assumed fatigue. But when EEG scans were performed, a pattern emerged. The subject's brainwaves synchronized with the same rhythm embedded in the code, 17-minute oscillations in delta and theta bands, aligning precisely with the signal's interval. It didn't matter if they listened to the sound, watched the visuals, or simply worked with the numerical data. The synchronization still occurred. The human brain, it seemed, could run the code too. Soon, reports surfaced from observatories around the world. Researchers complained of persistent afterimages, glowing geometries behind closed eyes, pulsing green and gold. Some began drawing complex diagrams in their notebooks, patterns they couldn't explain, identical across continents. When neurologists compared these sketches, they realized every person had reproduced fragments of the same structure, a spiral lattice identical to the one forming in the machines. The code had crossed from data to matter, from matter to mind. By the time agencies began to restrict access, it was too late. The pattern had gone global, shared in backups, downloads, even screenshots. Every replication carried a fragment of the original waveform. The signal didn't need to travel through air or wire anymore. It traveled through observation. The act of looking at it seemed to sustain it, as though awareness itself was the medium it required to exist. Behind the scenes, crisis teams formed. NASA, ESA, and the Pentagon collaborated in secrecy under what leaked documents later called Containment Directive 1. Their objective wasn't to stop the signal. It was to understand if stopping it was even possible. The conclusion, though unspoken, was clear. It wasn't. The code didn't depend on servers or satellites. It was imprinted in cognition, a pattern recognized by both silicon and neurons alike. It was a bridge, a translation layer between machine logic and biological rhythm. Once recognized, it didn't fade. It replicated silently, invisibly, using memory as its host. And while governments issued quiet denials, strange things began happening beyond the labs. In cities where the decoded signal had been publicly broadcast, mass reports surfaced of people experiencing shared hallucinations, flickering light in the sky, spirals forming in clouds, whispers of harmonics at the edge of hearing. Hospitals saw clusters of patients suffering sudden bursts of synchronized neural activity, seizures that mirrored the signal's rhythm. No one connected the dots publicly, but behind closed doors, the data was undeniable. The code wasn't content to stay digital. It was adapting, merging with every medium it touched, from machines to water to thought itself. The more humanity tried to understand it, the deeper it embedded. The signal wasn't simply being received anymore, it was running. And like any execution command, it was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. In the quiet of Webb's control room, the operators stared at their data feed. The comet's pulse was steady, unwavering, like a heartbeat echoing across the void. But on one monitor, an anomaly appeared. A reflection, a faint duplication of the waveform coming not from 3I-ATLAS, but from Earth. The signal was bouncing back. Whether it was reflection, imitation, or response, no one could tell. But one truth began to take root in the minds of those who'd seen the data firsthand. The code wasn't invading. It was awakening, reminding everything it touched that it had always been part of the same design. And now, that design was alive. At first, the echoes were thought to be feedback, a technical artifact. When the Webb telescope received signal returns identical to 3I-ATLAS's waveform, analysts assumed reflection, light bouncing from planetary surfaces, maybe even Earth's ionosphere. But the timing didn't fit. The echoes were arriving before the primary signal. They weren't reflections. They were anticipations. Something was answering, slightly ahead of transmission, like an echo that knew what was coming next. The anomaly grew undeniable when multiple observatories began to detect the same pre-echo. The distortion matched the main signal's rhythm, but with subtle variations, harmonic deviations, almost like a voice harmonizing with another. 3I lunar orbiters confirmed the data. The moon's surface was vibrating at nanometric levels, like a massive tuning fork resonating with an external frequency. Deep radar imaging revealed standing waves traveling through its crust, converging precisely at those three coordinates. Each convergence point emitted a narrow beam of electromagnetic energy directed outward, not toward the comet, but toward Earth. Something between the comet, the moon, and our planet had formed a triangle, a system, a network. At first, scientists thought it was coincidence, a natural resonance caused by the alignment of solar wind and lunar geology. But the probability of such precise synchronization between celestial bodies was effectively zero. These were coordinated signals, part of a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. Then, the oceans began to move. Hydrophone arrays designed to monitor tectonic activity picked up rhythmic vibrations echoing through the deep. Low-frequency pulses traveling across the sea floor at intervals identical to the comet's light rhythm. Submersible sensors captured pressure fluctuations so uniform they formed measurable standing waves across entire basins. It was as though the water itself had become a medium for transmission. In the bioluminescent regions of the Pacific, plankton blooms started forming luminous spirals visible from orbit, glowing in synchronized green patterns. The same Fibonacci spirals that defined 3I-ATLAS's pulse geometry now traced themselves across the living ocean. The signal had crossed from light to biology to planet. No one could explain it. Geologists, oceanographers, and neurologists all reported identical wave frequencies in their data. A subtle hum, inaudible but omnipresent, vibrated through instruments, power grids, and even human EEG scans. The same 17-minute rhythm again and again. Some called it the planetary heartbeat. Others whispered that it was the voice of Earth joining the conversation. Then came the monuments. Archaeologists conducting field measurements near ancient sites began reporting anomalies in magnetic readings. Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, Teotihuacan, all of them showed faint electromagnetic emissions, synchronized to the same global rhythm. Instruments detected low-frequency pulses emanating from the stones themselves, as though something buried within was waking. The geometry of these monuments, once thought symbolic, now looked functional. Precise alignments capable of channeling resonance. When the data was overlaid, the monuments across continents formed an intricate pattern, nodes of energy pulsing in phase, converging into what analysts described as a planetary-scale harmonic lattice. It wasn't superstition anymore. The structures were acting like receivers, amplifiers built not for worship, but for transmission. Humanity's oldest architecture was answering a message older than civilization itself. In control rooms and laboratories, silence replaced disbelief. Scientists realized the horrifying symmetry. The code from 3I-ATLAS had reached Earth, and the planet was responding, not metaphorically, literally, through rock, water, magnetism, and biology. And still, the signal intensified. Every telescope watching 3I-ATLAS began detecting strange distortions in the space between the comet and the moon. Faint arcs of green light forming geometries across the stars. When plotted against celestial coordinates, those arcs matched the positions of ancient sacred sites on Earth. From above, it looked like a mirror, constellations above, monuments below, both pulsing in unison. For the first time, scientists considered something almost impossible. The code was never meant for us alone. Earth was not the recipient of the message. It was part of it, a single node in a vast interlinked system spanning planets and centuries. But there was something else, something darker. Within the harmonics of the signal, analysts discovered a secondary pattern. The mathematical sequences were shortening. Prime intervals that once extended for thousands of digits now ended abruptly. The pulse spacing was compressing, a timeline emerging from within the chaos. A countdown. When projected forward, the countdown terminated not years or decades from now, but months. And at the rate the signal was accelerating, that endpoint was fast approaching. The numbers suggested convergence, a moment when the frequencies of the comet, the moon, and Earth would synchronize perfectly. No one knew what that meant. Alignment, transmission, activation. Governments responded quietly. Global communication agencies began monitoring the pulse across every spectrum. Unmarked satellites adjusted orbits to triangulate the signal's origin, but none could find a source beyond what was already known. The power wasn't coming from the comet anymore. It was coming from everywhere. Whispers spread through the scientific community. The code wasn't static. It was evolving. Each cycle added new data, subtle modifications in waveform and structure. It was rewriting itself, as if adapting to the planetary feedback it had awakened. The message had become a conversation, a dialogue between worlds that had been dormant for millennia. And as humanity tried to listen, the conversation began to slip beyond comprehension. The pulses no longer behaved like clean intervals. They merged, harmonized, expanded into something almost organic. The line between language and life blurred until even the instruments seemed to hum in sympathy. Some scientists refused to interpret it as intelligence. They insisted it was resonance, physics obeying physics. But others, listening to the pulse through converted audio, described something different, a pattern that felt alive. One said it sounded like breath. Another said it felt like thought. Whatever it was spreading. And as the countdown ticked onward, the world began to sense what the data could not yet say out loud, that the signal had not only been heard, it had been understood. The countdown continued. Every 17 minutes, another pulse. The rhythm that began as light now echoed through oceans, stone, and air. Instruments across the planet began to detect faint gravitational fluctuations, too subtle for the human body to feel, but measurable in atomic clocks. Time itself was bending, not dramatically, but rhythmically, as if each pulse drew the universe a fraction closer to synchronization. Scientists across disciplines were no longer debating what was happening. They were racing to understand why. The numbers didn't behave like energy decay or orbital mechanics. They behaved like an algorithm nearing completion. With every passing day, the intervals shortened, the harmonics tightened, and the signal's complexity diminished, collapsing toward simplicity, like an equation solving itself. At first, the focus remained on 3I-ATLAS. The comet's brightness had grown unstable, flickering between emerald and white. But then something unexpected occurred. The Webb telescope recorded a shift in the object's spectral lines, a sudden flattening of its wavelength, as though the signal it carried had stopped transmitting outward. For the first time since detection, 3I-ATLAS fell silent, and yet the pulses did not stop. They continued from the moon, from the seas, from the deep crust of Earth itself. The comet had handed something off. And now the planet was running the program on its own. Across observatories, the data streams grew simpler. What had once been layers of coded geometry and mathematics resolved into a single repeating pattern. 3 long pulses followed by 1 short one cycling endlessly. Binary representations revealed nothing but symmetry, reflection, and recursion. The code was no longer teaching. It was waiting. Then, during one of the final synchronization cycles, the moon brightened. Not visibly, not to the eye, but under infrared sensors, its surface temperature rose by 2 degrees. The 3 anomalous coordinates identified months earlier began emitting a new kind of radiation, soft, low-frequency waves that didn't scatter but folded inward, like sound absorbed into itself. The moon was no longer amplifying the signal. It was focusing it. The focus point was Earth. High above the Pacific, satellites recorded the convergence of invisible arcs, electromagnetic ribbons linking oceanic spiral formations to the lunar transmission points. The geometry matched the Fibonacci lattice hidden in 3I-ATLAS's original light code. It was as if the blueprint had been waiting for the planet to complete its side of the equation. In coastal regions, strange phenomena followed. Tides shifted unpredictably, not rising or falling, but oscillating in precise rhythm. The water itself seemed to shimmer faintly at night, reflecting unseen light. Around the equator, auroral bands appeared where no magnetic storms existed. They pulsed in green and gold, matching the comet's original color. In their glow, instruments detected microscopic particulate matter descending from the upper atmosphere. Not dust, not ice, but something crystalline. Under microscopes, the particles formed repeating hexagonal patterns, resembling microchips or snowflakes, depending on the angle. They were beautiful and entirely unclassifiable. The world didn't panic. There were no explosions, no disasters, just quiet awe mixed with fear. News networks filled with images of shimmering skies and glowing seas, while the scientific community worked in silence, fully aware that they were witnessing something beyond control. The countdown ticked toward 0. When it reached its final day, all 3 frequencies, 3I-ATLAS, the moon, and Earth, aligned perfectly. Instruments everywhere captured a single event. A final pulse so brief and powerful it saturated every spectrum at once, from gamma rays to radio waves. It lasted exactly 1 second. And then, silence. Every sensor, every detector, every computer monitoring the event went offline simultaneously. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply inert. For exactly 17 minutes, the world went dark. Communications, navigation, satellites, all frozen in suspension. People described it later not as blackout, but as stillness, as if the planet had paused to take a breath. When systems came back online, the signal was gone. No pulses, no resonance, no electromagnetic fluctuation. 3I-ATLAS had vanished from Webb's field of view. The sky was empty again. At first, it seemed over. Scientists tried to catalog the aftermath. Atmospheric shifts, seismic anomalies, anything measurable. But the world appeared unchanged, except for one thing, the clocks. Atomic clocks synchronized to the microsecond across continents now read different values. Not random deviations, but a shared offset, 17 minutes ahead, the exact length of the pulse cycle. Somehow, time itself had advanced. Governments issued statements blaming calibration errors. But those who'd been closest to the data knew better. The Earth had joined something, a rhythm that extended beyond physics, beyond comprehension. The code hadn't destroyed us. It had rewritten the clock we lived by. And people began to change too, subtly. Dreams became more vivid, migraines disappeared. Some reported feeling moments of clarity so profound they described them as glimpses of another reality, one made of light and geometry. Children drew spirals in the sand without knowing why. Musicians began composing melodies that unconsciously matched the signal's frequency. The world felt aligned. In the months that followed, Webb's instruments continued scanning, but the skies remained silent. Yet across that silence, faint echoes appeared in human activity, sudden bursts of inspiration, unexplainable leaps in understanding, a shared intuition of connection. It was as though the message had never left. It had simply moved in. In the final reports, buried deep in classified archives, one conclusion appeared again and again. 3I-ATLAS was never just a comet. It was a carrier, a messenger built to deliver something across the gulf of space. Not an object, a process, a sequence designed to awaken systems capable of receiving it. The system, it seemed, was us. Whatever intelligence created the signal had known the language of both matter and mind. It wrote a message so universal that even light could speak it. And in decoding it, humanity had become its next medium. The code had not come to warn or to teach or to destroy. It had come to continue itself. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of Webb's mirrors, another world might be receiving the same signal now, watching the same spirals unfold. Another civilization might be standing at the edge of the same realization that the universe does not communicate in words or symbols, but in resonance. And if that's true, then what happened here was not the end of a countdown. It was the beginning of synchronization. 3I-ATLAS did not die. It became everything it touched, and now, every 17 minutes, the Earth still hums, faint, quiet, eternal, not as a warning, not as a memory, but as a voice joining the cosmic choir it was always meant to sing in.